Hello. It has been far too long. This is incredibly overdue, but it is happening. I am so very glad you could join me. We are going to finish this book, starting now. I've got my water. I've got the book. So let's dive right back into it. If you don't remember where we're at, let me give you a quick recap. Martin the Warrior, wanting to know more about his past, left Redwall Abbey and journeyed to the northern shores. From there, they went to the Tall Rocks, where they found a ship smashed against the rocks and wedged there. Aboard, they found old companions of his father, Luke. These companions then proceeded to tell Martin the story of Luke. The legend of Luke, one might say. Luke was a simple community leader of his tribe on the northern shores when a vicious corsair pirate, Vilu Daskar, and his ship the Goreleech came upon them, killing just about everybody. Luke led the remaining warriors that they had to sea and chased after Vilu Daskar. Various adventures, mishaps, and stops along the way. However, Vilu Daskar and the Goreleech came upon their small ship, destroying it and killing many of Luke's companions. Luke and most of his companions are now chained in the ore decks of the Goreleech. However, two of his companions, Verg and Bo, a mouse and a hare respectively, have latched themselves to the outside of the Goreleech and are preparing a plot with Luke. Luke has convinced Vilu Daskar that the treasures of his tribe are buried up north, and Luke is now at the helm of the Goreleech, steering it there. And that is where we come back to it. So, let's dive back into The Legend of Luke by Brian Jacques. Chapter 34. Ringpatch the ferret came in from watch and slumped down on a pile of old rope and sailcloth, glad to be back in the big, smoky crew's cabin, mopping water from his fur.
Bad night out there, mates. Weather's rough as a toad's back and cold as captain's heart. Any victuals left?
Foulscale pointed to the empty pan on the table.
Take a look in there, mate. If there's anything left, then save half for me. Why in the name of fish guts aren't we down south somewhere in the warm sun, picking ripe fruit off of trees and plundering birds' nests? What's to be had up here, apart from your death of cold and starvation? That's what I'd like to know.
Akla snuggled up to the smoking stove, shaking his head.
Did the ice get down your ears, Foulscale? We're in the northern waters for treasure, or haven't you heard?
Treasure? Ringpatch crawled over to sit by the stove. Akla tossed some old rope into the stove and watched it burn bright as flames licked around the tarry strands.
Aye, treasure. You know that warrior mouse, Luke? Well, he steered in the ship up to where he stowed his tribe's booty. Vilu had a word with him, promised to set Luke and his two mates free if they let the captain get his paws on the treasure they had.
Foulscale showed his blackened teeth in a knowing grin.
Set 'em free, eh? You remember the last lot Vilu Daskar set free? Those four hedgehogs. What do you call that, Willag?
The sea rat chuckled with glee.
Oh, I remember it all right. They were holding back a supply of grain they harvested. Old Vilu promises to set 'em free once he's got his claws on the stuff, so that he showed him where they'd hidden it.
One rat had not been a crew member at the time, so he had to ask. And, did Daskar set him free? Akla looked about for more rope to feed the stove.
Course the captain did. He had 'em sewed up into grain sacks with some good heavy rocks, and he dropped 'em overboard. Billy's last words to the hedgehogs were, "You leave my ship alive, free to go where ye will." The sea rogues pounded each other's backs and laughed. "Never told a lie in his life, is our captain." "Wonder what he think of for this mouse Luke and his mates." "Better take 'em up to some cliff top and set 'em free as birds." "Or introduce 'em to some new friends, the sharks." "Whatever it is, the captain's sure to give us all a good laugh, mates. Then we could sail southward to the sun and prime victuals for a while. Without Luke and his two mateys, though." Perug the boatswain gestured to Foulscale with his knotted rope. "Oi, you, stir your stumps there. 'Tis your turn to relieve Ringpatch on watch. Never mind sitting round here laughing and joking. Get out on deck with you, go on." Foulscale shot the boatswain a hateful glance. Wrapping a piece of sailcloth around him, he lumbered reluctantly out. Akla called after him, "Don't let the sea bogle get ya." Foulscale spat out the cabin door and blew it back in his own face. "Tcha! Sea bogle! That deserted ship soon as there wasn't enough grub to feed a fly. Sea bogle only brought bad luck to this ship. Just as well 'tis gone." He ducked as Perug flung an old sea boot at him, calling, "It won't be sea bogles you have to worry about if you stands with that door open much longer, freezing us all to our graves. Get out to watch, you little lump, and shut that door after you." Bo and Verg climbed aboard the red ship, being unable to endure further cold and hardship hanging onto the raft at the stern. Gripping any protrusions available, they made their way along the outside of the gore leech, avoiding being seen by the afterpeak, where Luke was tied to the wheel, guarded by 10 crew and Vilu Daskar, who had a canvas awning to protect them and a brazier to warm their paws upon. The two friends made it to the foredeck and hid behind a sail-draped hatch cover. From their hideout they could see the shoreline, white sand backed by sheer cliffs which reared into the night. Bo snuggled down. "Well, it ain't much, Vergy, but as my old auntie used to say, something's better than nothing when you've got nothing. What?" Verg threw an affectionate paw around his comrade. "Shall I tell you what my old auntie used to say, Bo? Well, she always said to me, if you're hiding under a hatch cover with a sailcloth over it, and there's an hare with you, then don't let the hare talk about how hungry he is, and don't let him sing. There, that's what my old auntie used to say." Bo was still in a fine old huff with Verg. "Food? Who said I was going to talk about food, eh? What? Far too hungry to talk about food. And I ain't going to sing to you no more after you jumped in my head and damaged me warbler. Savage mouse wretch, that's what you are. Great seasons of stones. Take a look at my head, Verg." The mouse poked his head from the sailcloth, his gaze following the bowsprit to judge the ship's course. "'Tis the tall rocks, Bo. We're headed for the tall rocks." Rearing like prehistoric giants to the gloomy night sky, hundreds of the monolithic stone pinnacles stood out from the coast for leagues. Waves crashed into white foam at their bases, sending white spume flying high into the air. A peculiar effect, like screaming, tortured animals, assaulted their ears as the gale-force winds tore between the awesome columns, whose tops seemed to touch the tempest-driven clouds. For the first time in his life, Bo Featheringsall Cosfortingham was robbed of the power of speech. He sat there with his mouth hanging open. Verg was the first to recover and do something. "Luke's going to smash the ship into the tall rocks. Quick, Bo, climb down to Rangiva. I think Luke will give the signal very soon now. I'll go astern and listen out for it. The moment I hear Luke's voice, I'll make my way along the ship's side and yell at the top of my voice. Go, now!" Vilu Daskar was also feeling something for the first time in his life. Fear. He had seen the tall rocks once, many seasons back when he was younger. However, he had not sailed remotely near them and had vowed never to do so.
But now he was in the midst of a storm, and his vaunted gore-leech headed straight for the tall rocks, relying only on the skill of a mouse or slave, bound to the steering wheel. Daskar stood dry-mouthed, sweating despite the cold, paws a-tremble and stomach churning. Tugging hard on the rope halter about Luke's neck, he yelled shrilly, "Watch what you're doing, and careful with my ship! Put her away from those rocks! Away, I say!" Luke kept his head bent, resisting the rope's tug. "How does it feel, murderer, to have death staring you in the face?" he gritted out from between clenched teeth. "Think of all the innocent creatures you've sent to their deaths. Go on, tell me how it feels." Vilu reached past Luke and managed to get a paw on the wheel. The warrior mouse sank his teeth into the paw, and with a yelp the pirate stoat withdrew. Vilu's guards drew their weapons. Luke shouted at them without turning his head. "One move from you, murderer, or any of your scum, and I spin this wheel and send her side into the rocks." Vilu's big mistake had been on binding Luke to the wheel. He was fully in control of the ship. The stoat signaled his crew to stay clear. Luke decided then to make his move. Throwing back his head, he roared at the top of his lungs, loud and long, "Dead ahead! Dead ahead! Dead ahead!" Slipping half in, half out of the lashing, churning sea, Verg scrabbled and clawed his way along the port side till he was amidships. Ahead of him, he could see Bo balancing precariously on Rangiver's oar shaft as it stuck out from the bow side, waiting for the signal. Verg clambered up onto the rail, shouting, "Dead ahead! Free the slaves! Take the ship!" In his excitement, he had forgotten all else. Next instant, Porog and Akla came rushing from the crew's quarters. "What's happening? Who's taking the ship?" "Somebody's trying to free the slaves! Call to arms! All paws on deck!" Slaves began pouring from the companionways of the 3 oar decks, some armed with what they could find, lengths of chain, pieces of timber, and pitifully few daggers. Unsure of how to proceed, they milled about the deck, some weeping openly, not knowing what to do with their newfound freedom. These slaves, all from the upper and middle deck, soon found themselves set upon by masses of heavily armed sea rogues, veterans in the business of bloodshed. Verg and Bo rushed to their aid, laying 2 sea rats low with savage kicks from his long hind legs. The hare grabbed the vermin's cutlasses and tossed one to Verg, bellowing, "Rally to us, you chaps! Don't sit around blithering! Fight!" Several of the younger and bolder spirits obeyed, but there were others too weak and frightened who were thoroughly intimidated by the fierce horde of the Goreleech's crew. These wretched creatures ran and hid, and a lot of them tried to push their way back down to the oar deck, to the benches and chains where they had lived for long seasons. Then, Rangiver Foeseeker arrived on the scene. Battering slaves aside like 9-pins, Bullflay came screaming out of the companionway, terror stamped on his ugly features. Behind him, like the shadow of death, was Rangivar. Laying into the slave master with his own whip, the black squirrel was a sight to strike fear into the heart of any beast now that she was on the loose. The long whip cracked around Bullflay's ears as Rangivar Foeseeker went after him, the stormy night echoing to her fierce battle cries. "Yahoo! I am the Foeseeker, born in Moondark to the crash of thunder. Sing your death songs!" In his panic, Bullflay fled straight up the rigging with Rangiver hard on his heels, her eyes red with blood wrath, laughing madly as she closed on her hated foe. Vilu Daskar felt himself gripped by the icy claws of panic. Never in his wildest imaginings had he dreamt this could happen aboard his red ship. "Akla! Porog, bring the crew astern! Gather to me!" As the sea rogues crowded around, Luke called to his enemy above the din of the storm and battle. "What are you going to do now, coward? Your slaves are free and fighting. The Goreleech is being driven to the rocks. 'Twas a bad day for you when you murdered my wife." As if to emphasize the dilemma, Bullflay's body, choked by his own whiplash, came flying down from aloft and crashed through the afterdeck stairs, taking with it 2 vermin who were making their way aft. Rangiver Foeseeker climbed halfway down the rigging then, with a blood-curdling yell, hurled herself onto a group of sea rogues who were hacking at helpless slaves on the main deck. The pirate's stoat turned on Luke, his voice a venomous hiss as he slashed at the bound warrior with his sword. "You were the cause of all of this, but I will end it here." Luke could not protect himself from the wild, vicious onslaught, even though the swinging blade chopped the ropes from one of his paws. Dulam and Denno were battling their way to the afterdeck when they saw Luke being attacked. Bo and Verg saw it too, and fought their way to the shattered stairs, Verg crying out, "Luke, no, hang on, mate, we're coming!" But Luke was not finished. Fighting his way up through waves of pain, he put all of his strength into a single blow. His paw chopped down on that of Viludaskar, sending the bone-handled scimitar skimming off into the sea. Then Luke had Daskar in a death grip, crushing him tight against the ship's wheel. Sea rogues hurled themselves onto the warrior, trying to free their captain, who was screeching with fright. Pounding willy-nilly at the warrior, they were about to break the awful grip he had on Viludaskar when suddenly Rangiver Foeseeker was in their midst, armed with 2 swords. The black squirrel was berserk tornado, dealing out death and fearsome wounds, laughing madly into the stricken faces of her foes. "'Tis a fine night to die! Take a deep breath, buckles! It'll be your last! I'll hold him off, Luke! You hold Daskar tight!" Looming up to the red ship was a towering rock, 10 times the girth of any craft, with waves riding high up its side and smashing in foamy cascades. Luke had Daskar's paws twined through the wheel spokes like a captive upon a rack, and the pirate stoat, his back pressed hard against the wheel, began begging and pleading hoarsely for his life as the Gorleech rode side on towards the monstrous column of wave-lashed stone. "Spare me, Luke! You can have the treasure of the freedom for all the slaves. Take the red ship too, but let me go. I speak truly. My word is my bond. Spare my life." The warrior pressed his face close to that of his mortal enemy, crushing him tighter and whispering, "Cowards die 1,000 times. A warrior only dies once. The spirits of all you have slain are watching you, Viludaskar, and they will rest in peace now that your time has come. You must die as you lived, a coward to the last." When the red ship struck the rock, it reverberated from stem to stern. There was a noise like an overhead peal of thunder. Then it was shorn in 2 halves upon the mighty pinnacle of stone. The Gorleech hung there for one awful moment. Then the whole stern, from afterdeck to midships, fell. With a huge creaking of sundered timbers, it hit the water and sank instantly. Far below the seas, never to be seen again. And that is where we will end this episode. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you especially to my Patreon supporters who continue to be endlessly patient with me. We're finishing this book over the next few weeks. Tune in next Thursday for the next chapter. But until then, be safe. Have a good week. And I'll see you then.